The fastest growing counties in America don't have skylines or rush hour. Some barely have a second stoplight. Meanwhile, Los Angeles and San Francisco are hemorrhaging residents. Americans are choosing emptiness on purpose. The reasons have less to do with where they're going than with what finally broke where they left. Pull up a population map of the United States, and the pattern is so obvious it's almost insulting. The coasts glow. The interior is dark. New Jersey packs more than 1,200 people into every square mile. Manhattan crams in over 70,000. And then there's Wyoming, sitting at 6. Montana at 8. Idaho at about 24. These are not small differences. These are different planets sharing the same flag. The math behind that map held for a century. People go where jobs are, jobs go where ports and rails and capital already sit, and the emptiness stays empty because nobody has a reason to fill it. And then, in the span of about 4 years, it cracked. Between April 2020 and July 2025, Idaho grew faster than any state in the country, a 10.4% increase, roughly 190,000 new residents pouring into a state that only just crossed the 2 million mark. 3 out of every 4 of those newcomers came from other American states, not from overseas. 90% of Idaho's net migration was domestic. They were arriving from California, from Washington, from Oregon, Americans with jobs, families, and moving trucks, trading the place they knew for a place they'd maybe visited once. And Idaho isn't alone. Montana added 19,000 people in a single year during the post-pandemic surge, more than the town of Lewistown, more than most of the towns on its own map. Kalispell, tucked near Glacier National Park, grew 26% in 5 years. South Carolina posted the highest growth rate in the nation in 2025. North Carolina led all 50 states in net domestic migration that same year, pulling in over 84,000 more Americans than it lost. Even Arkansas and Oklahoma, states that barely register in most people's mental geography, each gained around 14,500 net domestic migrants. Now here's the part that reshapes the usual narrative. When most people hear everyone's moving south, they picture Texas and Florida. And there's truth to that. Texas gained 67,000 net domestic migrants in the most recent year. And since 2020, it's added nearly 2.5 million people total. Florida's grown by almost 1.9 million in the same window. Those numbers grab headlines because the raw volume is staggering. But volume and transformation are two different things. Texas was already massive. Florida was already crowded. Adding another 100,000 to the Dallas metro doesn't change what Dallas is. Adding 19,000 people to Montana, a state with barely a million, changes everything. New schools, new roads, new pressure on water systems built for ranch towns. The empty states aren't just gaining population, they're gaining a completely different identity. And look at the other side of the ledger. California lost 229,000 more residents to other states than it gained in the year ending July 2025, and that was actually an improvement from the recent peaks. Over the past 20 or more years, California has run a domestic migration deficit every single year, with outflows exceeding international arrivals in most years since 1916. Cumulatively, the state lost roughly 1.5 million people to domestic outmigration between 2020 and 2024 alone. New York's numbers are just as stark. A net domestic outflow of nearly 138,000 in the most recent year, and the total since 2020 has topped 1 million. Illinois lost another 40,000 net domestic residents. These aren't rounding errors. They're entire mid-sized cities disappearing from the tax rolls every year, reappearing in the Mountain West or the Carolinas. The instinctive explanation is remote work, and it matters. It unlocked the door. Before 2020, choosing to live in Boise or Bozeman meant choosing to leave your career behind, or at least to rebuild it from scratch. The laptop changed that equation overnight. But the data shows something else. The majority of people moving to these empty states aren't remote workers. They're transferring within companies, they're taking local jobs, they're starting businesses, they're retiring earlier than they planned. Remote work isn't the engine, it's the permission slip. The desire to leave was already there, sitting in traffic on the 405 or staring at a mortgage statement in Bergen County. The laptop just cut the last rope. And that's the first assumption worth examining, that this migration is a lifestyle choice, a pandemic whim, a phase that'll reverse itself once the offices fill back up. The numbers say otherwise. Idaho's growth rate has hovered between 1.4 and 1.5% annually for 3 straight years now. Montana is still growing even as the surge cools from its 2021 peak. The states losing people aren't recovering their domestic losses. California's net outflow actually increased again in 2025. This isn't a blip. It's a current, and it's picking up tributaries. There's one more thing the map hides. The states people are choosing aren't actually empty, not in the way most Americans imagine. They have airports, hospitals, downtowns, universities. Boise has a metro area pushing 865,000 people. What they have is space between those things. Drive 20 minutes outside Boise and you're in farmland. Drive 20 minutes outside San Jose and you're in another suburb that costs $1.8 million. The empty in the title isn't really about population. It's about margin, room to build, room to breathe, room to buy a house without surrendering every paycheck to the mortgage. That margin is the product. And right now, millions of Americans are realizing it exists. But cheap land has been cheap in these states for over a century. Montana didn't suddenly sprout new acres. So what changed in the places people are leaving that turned middle of nowhere into the best deal in the country? Now here's the thing about a place like California. It didn't stop being beautiful. The Pacific didn't drain. The tech jobs didn't evaporate. The weather in San Diego is the same 72 degrees it's always been. What changed is the price tag attached to standing in the sun. A family needs roughly $221,000 in annual income to qualify for a mortgage on a median-priced California home. The state's actual median household income is about $102,000. The gap between what a typical family earns and what a typical house costs isn't a stretch, it's a canyon. In San Jose, the median home price sits at more than 12 times the median income. In Los Angeles, it's nearly 10. Nationally, that ratio is 4.6. The standard threshold where economists start calling a market severely unaffordable is around 5. California doesn't just clear that bar, it laps it. And this isn't a coastal quirk. Nationally, the typical American household earns about $80,000 a year and would need to earn $113,000 to afford a median-priced home, a gap of $33,000 that didn't exist a decade ago. More than 3/4 of homes on the market are now priced beyond what the typical household can carry. That pressure hits hardest in the metros that spent decades vacuuming in talent and building reputations as the places to be. And now, collectively, the 50 largest counties in the country, the ones with 1 million or more people, lost over 637,000 net domestic residents in a single year. That population didn't vanish. It reappeared in smaller counties, mid-sized metros, and states that most Americans had stopped thinking about. Turn to Florida, and the story gets even stranger. For years, Florida was the answer, the escape hatch from northeastern winters and northeastern taxes. Between 2020 and 2022, the state was absorbing nearly 1,600 new residents every single day. The peak hit almost 599,000 net migrants in a single year. But by 2025, that number had cratered to about 201,000. And the domestic share, Americans moving from other states, had collapsed to just 22,500. That's down from a 5-year average of over 178,000 to a figure you could fit inside a college football stadium with room to spare. Miami-Dade County alone lost nearly 73,000 domestic residents in 2025. Broward lost population too. Orange County, home to Orlando, saw domestic outflows cancel its international gains entirely. These aren't rural backwaters. They're the economic engines of the state, and people are leaving them. The reason is written into every homeowner's mailbox: insurance. Florida's average annual home insurance premium hit $8,292 in 2025, up nearly 50% from 2020, and roughly 181% higher than the national average. In high-risk zones, some homeowners are paying north of $10,000 a year just to insure a structure they've already paid for. That's not a line item. That's a second mortgage that buys you nothing you can sleep in. Put those two forces side by side, housing costs in California and insurance costs in Florida, and a pattern emerges that has nothing to do with politics, weather preferences, or remote work culture wars. It's simpler than that, and harder to argue with. There is a price ceiling on how much a household will tolerate before the math breaks, and millions of American families hit it at roughly the same time. The pandemic didn't create the pressure. It accelerated the timeline. People who had been quietly Googling cost of living in Boise since 2018 suddenly had a reason and a mechanism to act on it. The office is closed. The lease is ended. The moving trucks booked out 3 months in advance. And here's the part that reframes the entire Sun Belt story. Florida, the state that defined American domestic migration for 2 straight decades, is cannibalizing itself. Its expensive coastal counties are now bleeding residents to its own cheaper interior and to other states entirely. The growth that remains is concentrating in mid-size inland counties like Polk and Pasco, places where housing is still being built and prices haven't yet crossed the pain threshold. The Sun Belt isn't dying, it's sorting. The affordable pockets keep growing. The expensive ones are starting to export people the same way New York and California have for years. New York's numbers underline the point. The state lost nearly 138,000 net domestic residents in 2025, about 375 people walking out the door every single day. Since 2020, the cumulative domestic outflow has topped 1 million. Illinois has bled over 40,000 a year. These are not states people leave because they dislike them. They're states people leave because the cost of staying exceeds the cost of starting over somewhere unfamiliar. And once that equation flips, it doesn't unflip easily. The people who leave take their tax revenue, their spending, and their labor with them, which puts more strain on the people who stay, which pushes more people toward the door. So the math works. The exodus is real. It's structural, and it's coming from every expensive corner of the map simultaneously. But here's what still doesn't add up. Cheap land has been sitting in Idaho and Montana and South Dakota for a century. The cost of living gap between San Francisco and Boise isn't new. So what changed in the empty states themselves? What did they build, inherit, or stumble into that turn, showing up there from an act of surrender into something that actually feels like a life? Here's one way to misread this story. Assume the empty states are interchangeable. They're not. North Dakota is empty. So is West Virginia. Neither one is attracting the wave. The states that are pulling people aren't just cheap. They crossed a set of thresholds that most Americans don't think about until they try to live without them. Water. Broadband. A hospital you can reach in under an hour. An airport that connects to somewhere. Take away any one of those, and cheap land stays exactly what it's always been. Cheap land nobody wants. Start with connectivity, the piece that changed fastest. In 1919, Lewis County, Idaho, had broadband access for just 22% of its residents. By 2021, a state broadband grant program had wired it. Idaho poured nearly $50 million in CARES Act money into rural internet infrastructure in 2020 alone, funding over 100 projects across the state and connecting more than 30,000 underserved households. Montana followed a similar track. Both states have since been approved for hundreds of millions more in federal broadband funding, over $583 million for Idaho, more than $628 million for Montana, aimed at closing the last gaps. 5 years ago, moving to a ranch town in central Idaho meant accepting dial-up speeds and a satellite dish that failed in bad weather. Today, fiber crews are trenching cable along state highways through valleys most Americans have never heard of. That single change, fast internet in a place with no traffic, converted thousands of square miles from retirement daydream to plausible Tuesday. Now look at airports, because they reveal something most maps hide. Remote doesn't mean disconnected. Bozeman-Yellowstone International Airport handled about 1.57 million passengers in 2019. By 2025, that number had nearly doubled to over 2.8 million. The airport now offers nonstop service to roughly 30 cities, coast to coast: Dallas, Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Minneapolis, Boston. In August 2019, about 177,000 passengers passed through Bozeman's terminal. In August 2025, it was over 345,000, with flights running more than 90% full. A town that most Americans associate with fly fishing and elk hunting is now one of the busiest airports in the Mountain West. You can leave Manhattan at breakfast and be standing in a meadow outside Bozeman by lunch. That rewrites the calculation for anyone with a job that requires occasional FaceTime on either coast. And then there's the case that breaks the mold entirely: Northwest Arkansas. Most Americans couldn't place it on a map. But within about 30 miles of Bentonville, a town of around 60,000, sit the global headquarters of Walmart, the world's largest company by revenue, Tyson Foods, the biggest meat processor in the country, and J.B. Hunt, one of the largest trucking and logistics firms in North America. 3 Fortune 500 companies clustered in the Ozarks. More than 1,400 consumer brand suppliers have opened offices in the region just to be close to Walmart. The metro area's unemployment rate hovers around 2%. The population has crossed 560,000 and keeps climbing, adding roughly 40 new residents a day. This isn't a place people are discovering because it's cheap. It's a place where a corporate ecosystem planted itself decades ago, grew quietly while nobody outside the industry was watching, and now functions as a complete economic engine in a region that, from the outside, still looks like small-town America. Northwest Arkansas matters because it illustrates the bigger principle. The empty states pulling people aren't blank canvases. They have specific structural advantages, and the states that lack those advantages aren't growing at all. Wyoming has no state income tax and 6 people per square mile, but its population barely budged in 2025, a gain of about 2,000 residents. It has the scenery, the space, and the tax structure. What it doesn't have, in most of its geography, is the infrastructure threshold. Limited broadband outside of Jackson and Cheyenne. No major airport hub. Very few employers large enough to anchor a regional economy. Emptiness alone doesn't attract anyone. Emptiness plus a fiber line, an airport, a hospital, and at least one reason to earn a living that attracts everyone. Water tells the same story from the geological side. Montana sits on enormous freshwater reserves. Idaho's Snake River Plain Aquifer has supported agriculture and communities for over a century. Meanwhile, the states people are leaving are increasingly defined by drought. California has been rationing water in some form since the early 2010s. Parts of the Southwest are drawing down the Colorado River faster than it recharges. When climate modelers map disaster risk across the United States, considering hurricanes, wildfires, chronic flooding, extreme heat, and water scarcity, the empty Mountain West and Upper Great Plains sit in a relatively calm corridor. Nobody used to talk about climate resilience as a real estate feature. Now it's showing up in relocation guides, insurance risk assessments, and the quiet mental math families run when they're choosing between 2 places they could afford. There's a historical accident buried in some of this infrastructure, too. Federal land makes up 62% of Idaho's total area and around 29% of Montana's. For decades, that was seen as a limit. Land the government owns is land nobody can build on. And that's true. It constrains sprawl. But it also preserves something most fast-growing states burned through long ago: open space adjacent to functional towns. The federal land created a buffer that kept the landscape from being subdivided and strip-mauled the way the Sunbelt corridors were. The towns at the edges of national forests and BLM land have something most American suburbs lost: a viewshed that isn't another subdivision. And it turns out, when people are choosing where to start over, That matters more than anyone in a planning office would have predicted. So the people are coming, the math works, and the infrastructure is in place, or close enough. It sounds like a clean success story for the empty states. Except when you pour tens of thousands of new residents into places built for tens of thousands fewer, the thing that attracted them starts to buckle. And in some of these towns, it's already buckling. In 2019, the median home price in Ada County, that's Boise and its immediate suburbs, was about $340,000. By late 2025, it had crossed $555,000. That's a 63% jump in 6 years, in a market that people were fleeing to specifically because it was affordable. Run those numbers against local incomes, and the picture gets sharper. As of 2025, only about 5.6% of homes listed for sale in Idaho were affordable for a household earning $75,000 a year. That's worse than Oregon, worse than Colorado. The only states with a smaller share of affordable listings were Massachusetts, California, Rhode Island, Utah, and Washington, the very places people left to come to Idaho. The escape hatch is closing from the inside. Montana tells the same story at an even steeper pitch. The state's median listing price climbed to over $634,000 in 2024, set against a median household income of roughly $70,000. That gap gave Montana the lowest realtors' affordability score in the entire country, dead last, below California, below New York, below Hawaii. Over 5 years, Montana's median home prices surged 85%, the fastest increase of any state in America. A place that most Americans still picture as ranch land and pickup trucks is now, by one measure, the single least affordable housing market in the nation relative to what its own residents earn. In Bozeman, the numbers are almost absurd. A household needs to earn about $220,000 a year to afford the median home. The area median income is roughly $120,000. Nearly 4 in 10 single-family homes in the city are selling for over $1 million. That's not a housing market adjusting to growth. That's a housing market being rewritten by people who arrive with equity from somewhere more expensive. A family that sells a modest home in suburban Seattle or Sacramento walks into Bozeman or Kalispell with $400,000 in cash and bids over asking without blinking. The local teacher, the line cook, the nurse, the mechanic, the people who actually keep a small town running can't compete with that. And this is where the paradox bites hardest. The newcomers need those workers. They need someone to pour their coffee, teach their kids, staff the emergency room. But the workers can't afford to live where the jobs are, because the newcomers' arrival is exactly what made the housing unaffordable. It's a loop with no clean exit. Kalispell grew 26% in 5 years. It also watched its median home price climb past $550,000. Missoula topped $568,000. Montana's legislature responded with bipartisan housing reform bills in 2023 and again in 2025, streamlining subdivision processes, protecting accessory dwelling units, easing manufactured housing restrictions. These are real tools. But housing markets don't turn on a legislative session. Years of underbuilding, rising construction costs, and unrelenting demand mean the pressure won't ease quickly, even with good policy. The tension between growth and livability has been building for more than a decade, and the reforms are chasing a problem that keeps accelerating ahead of them. And here's where the cultural friction shows. Attend a public planning meeting in Gallatin County or the Flathead Valley, and you'll hear it. Longtime residents pushing back against proposed subdivisions, new apartment complexes, rezoning requests. The arguments are familiar. Traffic, water, character of the community. We didn't move here for this. Except a surprising number of the people making those arguments didn't move here until 2020 or 2021. They arrived during the first wave, loved what they found, and now want to slam the gate behind them. It's the last one in, close the door dynamic, and it plays out in nearly every fast-growing small town in the Mountain West. The irony is thick enough to pave a road with, but the frustration underneath it is real. people who came for the emptiness are watching it fill up in real time, and they have no mechanism to stop it short of making the place they chose unaffordable for the next family making the same choice. Some towns have tried. Impact fees, growth boundaries, moratoriums on building permits. The legal tools are limited because you can't constitutionally tell an American citizen where they're allowed to live, and the economic pressure is enormous. Developers follow demand. Demand follows affordability. And affordability, in these formerly empty places, is evaporating on a timeline that looks eerily familiar. Boise's price curve over the past decade looks a lot like Denver's curve from 5 years earlier. Denver's tracked Portland's from 5 years before that. Portland tracked San Francisco. The wave doesn't invent a new pattern. It just replays the same one in a new zip code, with a slight delay each time. And the wave is already moving again. The people getting priced out of Boise aren't going back to California. They're looking at Spokane, at Coeur d'Alene, at smaller towns in eastern Oregon and western Wyoming. The people getting priced out of Bozeman are scanning Butte, Great Falls, Helena, places that don't yet have the airport traffic or the restaurant scene, but do have the one thing that started this whole cycle: room. Some analysts are watching parts of the Dakotas, rural Maine, and northern New Mexico, places so far off the radar that they barely register in moving truck data yet. The frontier keeps retreating. The math keeps replaying. So here's what the map actually shows, if you know how to read it. The empty states aren't empty anymore, or at least the parts of them that had water, broadband, and an airport aren't. The people who arrived first got the deal of a generation. The people arriving now are getting a smaller version of the same deal at a higher price with more traffic. And somewhere out past the last subdivision, in a county that doesn't have a second stoplight yet, a family from Boise is pulling up a real estate listing on their phone because Boise got too expensive. The search for emptiness doesn't end, it just moves. And the map never stays the same for long.